this lecture, we'll talk about working with families through difficult transitions. We're going to focus specifically on the following difficult transitions for children and families: divorce, family blending, military deployment, and grief and bereavement. We're going to start by looking at divorce and separation, and some of this was covered when we talked a little bit about divorce in previous lectures, but in general I will say to you that divorce and separation almost always brings out emotions of bereavement in the adults involved and also in the children. Children tend to have very age-specific reactions, which we're going to look at in a couple of slides. And parents have sort of a mixed bag of responses. For parents, it's more complicated. There's bereavement because it's the end of something that folks had envisioned to be different. And then it may also be mixed with some anger at the other adult, even some feelings of freedom, and so sometimes parents may even feel happy or relieved, but children in general cannot share that same experience or feeling. It is impossible for a child to feel happy or relieved in that moment because they can't understand the complexities of adult relationships, and of course they don't have that same experience. You can break up with a partner, but you can't stop loving your parent. So there are a lot of differences in parents and children's reactions. In terms of the effects on parents, divorce causes all of the following, and it's documented, well documented in the research: increased illness, accidents, psychological problems, even when the divorce is wanted, even by the person seeking the divorce. I read a study once that said that folks drive more poorly when they are experiencing a divorce because grief has an impact on your driving. So, and as you can see, it's even when the divorce is sought because there is a period of grieving. For parents, having a confidant or friend increases resilience. This does not mean that you, as the early learning teacher, need to be that confidant or friend. I would advise you not to put yourself in the middle of that. Parents do need to have a confidant or friend. They need to have somebody that they can talk to. It just shouldn't be you. And this is really hard because we do grow attached to parents and we develop relationships. I will caution you, there are always two sides to every story, and it's really difficult. I saw in one of the schools that I worked at that one teacher had the mom kind of always telling her all these bad things about the dad and kind of whispering in her ear, and that teacher took such a disliking to dad. And I'm not going to say she was unprofessional with dad, but she certainly did not, knock herself out to reach out to him either. And really, as it turned out, as the story kind of emerged like a year later when that child had moved on to another classroom, that dad was actually very nice, but the mom had a problem with lying. She really did. She lied kind of all the time, like it was she could have been a professional liar. She was just really adept at twisting things around, and it's just so important to not get sucked into that because you really don't know what has occurred within a family context. In general, females tend to fare better emotionally during a divorce, and males fare much better financially. The negative impacts of divorce for the family tends to resolve after about a year and a half after the point of separation. And we do definitely see distressed distressed parenting. It's just that the process of divorce is so stressful for the adults involved that sometimes it's hard to be extra patient at helping that child learn to tie a shoe, or extra vigilant in making sure that you send in that can of frosting to the school for the school project. Okay, the effects on children. The immediate effects when folks are at that point of separation and moving into divorce is stress and anxiety. Oh my goodness, my parent has moved out, we have moved, there's huge change, I don't see both of my parents every day, the thing that I thought was our family is totally shifting, This is huge. Now, long term, it subsides after 1 to 2 years. You'll notice in the previous slide I said about a year and a half. And two factors seem to determine the reaction of how children react and when. And one of the factors is age, and another factor is gender. Younger children tend to kind of clam up, and some things can go over their head a little bit more. Gender has to do with access to the other parent. There's really quite a bit of literature to suggest that when fathers do not have substantial custody with girls, they see them a lot less. They see boys more, but in general, there's a change in terms of child access, and there does seem to be a gender consideration in this. Older children in high conflict situations do express relief. Children who are in homes where there's constant fighting will say, oh, I am so relieved, I just don't want them to fight anymore. Elementary school children will even say this. Adolescents certainly, but even children like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade will articulate, my parents were fighting all the time and I just couldn't take them still fighting. Now they don't fight anymore. This is how preschoolers tend to deal with divorce separation. They tend to experience fright because any kind of change can be frightening to a preschooler. Those of you that have worked with preschoolers know that when there's radical change, sometimes it's hard for the kids to handle, even if it's just a big change in the schedule. They exhibit irritability, temper tantrums, inhibited play, and sometimes feel guilty or feel responsible or think, oh, well, if I didn't need so many timeouts, they start to wonder about that and take some of that on. The effects on 6 to 8-year-olds. 6 to 8-year-olds at or near the point of separation tend to fear rejection and abandonment. They're just not sure what's going to happen or what this is going to look like. They exhibit irritability, poor impulse control, possessiveness, like, no, that's my toy. It's all about trying to regain control over something because they feel like the rest of their lives are out of control. And they have difficulty expressing positive and negative emotion toward the same person. They kind of have black and white thinking, like you're either all good or all bad. And that's developmental at that age. It's very hard for them to, kind of think of it in a mixed way. So they do have a lot of difficulty with that. And sadness. 6 to 8-year-olds will articulate that they're sad. Effects on 9 to 12-year-olds. They are attempting to process their feelings. They're angry, aggressive. Sometimes you'll hear 9 to 12-year-olds say, well, I thought we were supposed to work through our conflict. Why can't you work through your conflict? Aren't you supposed to work through your conflict? You tell me to do that all the time. There's a shame of social stigma. They're kind of worried, like, well, how does this fit in with what everybody else is doing? A shaken sense of right and wrong. Because again, if you just look at where 9 to 12-year-olds are at, they're kind of thinking, well, wait, I thought that this is how it went, and I thought you said we would always be a family, and so they're kind of working through that. Decreased self-esteem, and they may get caught between the parents. The big danger for 9 to 12-year-olds is that they are old enough that a lot of times the adults will make them kind of a confidant or explain too much, give them too much information. Well, or be unguarded about what they're talking about in front of a 9 to 12-year-old. And here's the thing about kids, is they will not say to you, when I was sitting in the back seat and I heard you talking about Dad to Aunt Sue, it made me feel so sick and sad inside. They just won't say anything. They kind of freeze up. They're not sure what they're supposed to do. And adults will kind of check in the back seat and say, everything okay? Do you know what you want to eat, eat at McDonald's? And the child will reply, oh yeah, I'd like chicken McNuggets. And then the parent thinks, oh, well, they didn't absorb what I was saying to Aunt Sue. They just were thinking about chicken McNuggets. you get a lot of times poker face response from children when they're hearing one parent talk about the other parent on the phone or relaying a story to a friend or things like that. They just don't respond, but it doesn't mean they're not taking it in. They are taking it in and they're upset. They just don't have any idea what they're going to do about that. Okay, so families that experience divorce, and we've talked in other lectures about how you are likely to have this happen in your early learning setting. Well, folks do remarry. They say that remarriage is the triumph of hope over experience. And most people with young children, if they're young enough to have young children, they're young enough to start again and to find someone else. So when people remarry, they blend. That's what that's called. Blended families and step families are interchangeable terms. And there are some challenges. A lot of times folks will think, oh, this is great because it's, now you'll have an intact family. But it's really not like having an intact family. It's like having a step family. There are unique challenges to blending. They say that blending takes between 2 and 5 years. Some of the challenges of being in a step family are there are loyalty conflicts for the parent and the child. So when something happens, sometimes the parent will feel protective of their kid. When there's an issue with other kids in the house or with the partner, I mean, there's a push-pull of loyalty for an adult that's in a partnered relationship and then has a child with some other partner. Competition among children, that is a huge issue if you think about the differences in resources that people bring, and especially when you've got like kids from one person and kids from another person. You could have like his, her, and my kids, where you've got like kids together even, and that means all those people have different grandparents. They have different other parents who may be giving them different amounts of attention, different amounts of material goods, and there's competition. There is absolutely competition among children who experience that. So I know in my own family, for example, there was a blending of 2 families, and he had 2 kids and she had 2 kids. And for her 2 kids, there were presents that were like $25 gift cards. And when the oldest one turned 16, there was going to be, a beater car, kind of a junker. And he was going to be grateful for the junker because that's what they could do. That's what that biological dad could do. That's what that set of grandparents could provide. That's what they could do. But his kids had a different set of grandparents and had a different biological parent than her kids. And his kids would routinely get $100 gift certificates or checks for Christmas, $200. The expectation was, oh, you'll definitely get a new car, because remember, it's not just the 2 people in this marriage either. You've got these other parents out there. And if that mom wants to get her boys a brand new car, you can't really prevent that. But you can see how it would create competition. Oh, well, so-and-so has a laptop. Oh, and to add the icing on the cake, I told you the 16-year-old that was going to get a junker for his 16th birthday from that side of the family, and then the 16-year-old was going to get a new car. Those boys were the same age. They were within 5 months of each other. So it's not like this is happening, years apart. It's all happening at the same time. So it really can be quite difficult. And then, for parents to try to decide, how to split up resources fairly, and it can be quite challenging. There are confusing parenting roles in step families. Discipline, when it's your own kids, you definitely know when to discipline them. Anytime that you feel they need it. Anytime they need to be taught something and they need to have you explain to them what's going on and what the limit is and here's a consequence. As a parent, you do that anytime. But when it's sort of your kid but not your kid, boy, that's tricky. And affection, that's tricky too. And some children are not always interested in receiving the affection of that other person. And it takes time to feel affection for some other people's children. It's not, always instantly there. And the financial support piece. So all of this is to say that you need to know that when folks blend, when they create a step family, it is not an easy thing that the family is going through. The kids are going through a hard time. The parents are going through a hard time, and they're figuring it out. Oh, one more thing about that family that I just told you about, the two 16-year-olds. Well, his 16-year-old was the baby of the family until they blended, because both of her kids were, well, one's the same age and then the other one was younger. So all of a sudden he wasn't the baby of the family anymore. And the other 16-year-old, well, he used to be the oldest, but now he has somebody his age and then an older stepbrother too. So they both lost their status as baby of the family and oldest child, and that's pretty difficult too. So again, just think about all of the stuff that folks are negotiating. Okay, step-parent-child relationships. Younger children are more likely to accept a step-parent. Older children are more likely to reject a step-parent. Stepmothers usually have the hardest time being accepted, and stepfathers tend to be a little bit more hands-off. Okay, another transition that I want to talk with you about is military deployment. When one or both parents deploys, it causes a huge shift in family functioning. And this is true during preparation for deployment, during the actual deployment itself, and then even for the reunion. And I've given you a source down at the bottom of this slide in case you wanted to read a little bit more about military deployment. Okay, deployment stressors on children. Pre-deployment, children experience confusion. They may regress to an earlier or younger stage. They may have outbursts of anger. They may express sadness, surprise, guilt, or behavioral problems because they know, oh, it's coming down the pike, and the family gets stressed out, and oh my goodness, and there are sometimes deployments to peaceful areas, but most of the time deployments take place to a part of the world where your friends and your family are not real excited that you're going to. And all of that worry and that stress is experienced by the child too. And they have even less capability to deal with it than we do as adults, and we don't deal with it that well. During deployment, children tend to be at higher risk for problems than the national norm, kind of just globally. Academic issues, social issues, at school, so, behavioral troubles, everything from tummy aches to trouble in school. Their kids are just at a little bit more higher risk. That doesn't mean that all children experience that. It just means that they're at a higher risk for experiencing sort of a whole host of things that are related to stress. Parenting stress during deployment is much higher than the national norm. Of course, that makes sense. Not only is your partner not there to help you, but they're also somewhere that probably feels unsafe, and somewhere that they can't, you can't just always call them whenever you want. We're very lucky to live in the age of Skyping and satellite phones, so maybe it's not as bad as it was a generation ago, but it's still not great. It's still pretty stressful for parents. Boys and younger children experience more symptoms than girls. I think this is a very interesting finding, and I think it has a lot to do with the amount of social support that we give boys versus girls. Interestingly, in the divorce literature, boys do not fare as well as girls, in part because they don't get as much support. Like when a girl is experiencing a trauma, teachers and classmates and other people check in a lot, like, oh, are you okay? How are you doing? Do you need a Kleenex? Want a teddy bear? Do you want a picture of your family? And we're not as faithful about that with boys. And the research bears that out. What happens with boys is, staff, teachers, adults in the child's life are just kind of afraid of making the boy cry, at school. And so people are not checking in with the boy. Hey, how are you doing? Want a picture of your family? Do you need some Kleenex on your desk? Are you okay? Do you need a hug? And they don't get that same kind of emotional check-in like girls do. And so when we say that boys may experience more symptoms than girls, it's because what they're left with is a lot of acting out because they don't always get that support that they need. And younger children may experience more symptoms as opposed to older children um, because they're less equipped to release their feelings or be able to talk about things in a different way. Internalizing symptoms may be more common than externalizing symptoms. So sometimes we act out a little bit, but or have headaches or things like that. But it's it's sort of a thing that is difficult oftentimes for children to really be able to process and figure out who to talk about it with. Okay, this is a chart that outlines children's reaction to deployment, and it reflects the percent that reported with moderate to very serious problems. So fear about deployed parent, you can see that's high. Sadness, adjustment to one parent, concentration problems, aggression, distress over media reports. That's one of the things that's challenging too, is keeping kids off of TV when the parent is in a war situation. Depression, distress over war rumors, academic problems, and behavioral problems in school. All of this is to say kids are worried about it. Well, then you'd think when the deployed parent comes back, everything's good, so easy to fix. But reunions are actually also very stressful because folks had to adjust to someone being gone. If folks were keeping it together, despite the fact that they were stressed out all of that time, and there's something even psychologically that, when the person comes back, you kind of, oh, I was really stressed that you were gone. So there's kind of a psychological piece to that too, where people are almost like feeling a delayed reaction. But there are changed roles and responsibilities. Folks had to figure out how to function without the deployed person, and so everybody has to reshift when that person comes back. Spouses may be more independent. There may be kind of a lack of time, a tug on loyalties in terms of, moving those shifts around. Extended family, that can be stressful. Maybe everybody wants a piece of that deployed family member, or maybe people aren't even as supportive as the family thought. Maybe the deployed member comes back and thinks, okay, well, everybody said they were so worried while I was away. Now that I'm back, and maybe I need help reintegrating, or maybe my family needs help, or whatever. Oftentimes there seems to be just extended family stuff around reunions. We don't even know entirely why, but we know it happens. Health and mental health problems. Aside from the difficulty of all of the family shifting, it's not that easy to deploy, particularly if you're talking about in a war zone. And then there are marital issues. Sometimes, folks will have issues that were there before the person deployed. Well, those haven't gone away. You're glad to be back and you're glad to have the person back, but it doesn't mean that their insensitivity over X, Y, or Z doesn't still bother you, or that hurt from some unresolved marital problem has just completely disappeared either. Okay, so post-deployment stressors for children. Oftentimes what we see when parents return is we see that children want the attention of that person that was gone. Everybody wants a piece of that serviceman or that servicewoman that has just returned. And it can be really overwhelming, and sometimes that person can't even really give all that's expected. Mind you, they're dealing with their own stuff coming back and reintegrating too. Children are very clingy. They may be angry, very angry that the child is very angry that the parent had left. The child would be very angry, needing a lot of reassurance. Sometimes they'll attempt to split parents in terms of decision making, like, wait a second, this was allowed when you were gone, what do you mean? And they'll kind of take it back. Hey, Mom, can I do X, Y, or Z? Because Dad said I couldn't do it, but I was able to do it that whole time he was gone. So sometimes we see those kinds of dynamics. Children desire recognition. They kind of want to be recognized for being such a big boy or such a big girl while the parent was gone. And of course, joy and excitement is part of it too. Um, but it's such a big emotional, spike that even that in and of itself, they're almost afraid to feel so joyful and afraid to feel so excited, and it's a big, huge change, even when somebody comes back. So all of this is to say to you that deployment is stressful. It's deployment leading up. It's stressful leading up. It's stressful when the person is gone, and it's stressful even when the person comes back. Okay, finally, I want to talk with you all about grief and loss. Um, Everybody is going to experience grief and loss in some ways. We've talked specifically about the kind of grieving, mourning, adjusting, transitioning that takes place with divorce and with blending and with deployment. But there's also grief and loss associated with death. And this is something that you are likely to experience with your kids in your classroom. Most often, it's loss of a grandparent or loss of a pet. Sometimes it's grief and loss that is more profound and less expected, like family, friends, or others when that person is younger. Sometimes it could be a parent or a sibling or a friend or family friend, someone who doesn't seem kind of old enough that you would think that that could occur. Loss of a grandparent is traumatic enough, and loss of a pet also is very difficult. In any case, you will probably deal with issues related to grief and loss in your classroom. So here's some information about it. We know that children of all ages grieve, and demonstration of grief is particular to age groups. It's important to not shut down children's expression of grief, because grieving is really hard, and sometimes we don't know how to get it out. So when it does come out, you want to allow that. Children should not be protected from grief, funerals, issues of death and dying. It's not a secret. I actually have a friend who lost her husband, and her children lost their father. And one of the things that she said to me not too long ago is that she feels that her husband has turned into he who must not be named. She was calling him Voldemort one day. She said people are afraid to speak his name in front of the children or in front of me, and I wish that they would. Um, he was great, and I hope that people will remember that we used to make s'mores with our big group of friends on Halloween, and I hope that people will remember those things. Um, Children need to be educated in terms that they can understand, um, and also know that parents are also grieving. Be understanding that folks are not at their best when they are grieving. I had a mom come in one day for a class party, and she was going through the slow decline of her own mom, and she came to school, brought her 2-year-old, which was highly unexpected that she brought her 2-year-old to the class party for the first graders. And the 2-year-old was just tearing around the classroom. She turned over a plastic bucket full of money. It went everywhere. She was like climbing on stuff. It was such an overwhelming experience to have that child in that classroom at that time, where there was a class party going on, and the kids were making like candy houses, and I don't even know, there was like food involved, and the little one was excited to get into that stuff too, and we had some materials for her but not all of them. But anyway, I just remember thinking, why is this happening? Why are you not seeing that your 2-year-old, and I love kids, but your 2-year-old is everywhere that she is not supposed to be? And then it kind of made sense to me when I found out that that really she was just in a place of grieving. So it doesn't mean that I thought like, oh, that's okay, totally destroy the class, and it's not that. It's not that you have to reply to someone's grief by giving them free rein, but at least it gave me a more understanding perspective, and so I would just encourage you to remember that. Grief and bereavement is something that is not unique. We will all experience grief and bereavement, and just it helps if we know what families are going through, and what children will bring into our classrooms.